Welcome to Cafe SUO, where we dive into the stories of leaders shaping our world. I'm Rizwan Aslam, and today I'm honored to speak with Dr. Douglas Gerard, the Chancellor of the University of Kansas. Dr. Gerard has had an extraordinary career, not only as a university leader, but also as a highly respected and talented head and neck surgeon. His contributions to medicine, medical education, and now university leadership make for a truly inspiring journey and story. In this episode, the third episode of Cafe SUO, we're going to explore his path from the operating room to the chancellor's office, his impact on healthcare, and what his experience as a surgeon has taught him about leadership. Dr. Gerard, welcome to the show.
Hey, Riz, thanks for having me.
Doug, let's just start by talking about your beginning, right? What first inspired you to pursue a career in medicine, and what led you to specialize in head and neck surgery? SUO, as you know, and you've participated in for many years, is an organization for otolaryngologists. And your story is very unique. And we'd love to hear about just how you got your start as an otolaryngologist and your interest in otolaryngologists. You've had an extensive history. You've done a lot. So talk to me a little bit about where you got your start and where your interest as a head and neck surgeon came from.
It's a long time ago, but yeah, to be honest, out of high school, I grew up in Oregon, Salem, Oregon, which at the time was probably 60,000 people. It's before Oregon discovered grapes, which completely changed the economy of the state of Oregon. But I predate that. And I wasn't sure what I wanted to do out of high school. Actually, I thought about medicine, but the duration of education was a fairly daunting thought, and decided maybe I wanted to do electrical engineering. So I actually graduated from high school and put everything in my car and drove to the Silicon Valley and rented a room for my uncle, who was an electrical engineer, and went to work. And wanted to learn more about the field and see if, in fact, that's something I was interested in doing. And had an opportunity to work at worked at Atari, missed Steve Jobs by about 4 months.
That was amazing.
Worked there for a while, built hard drives, and ultimately ended up with a startup company as the 9th employee. They got some great experience there. And actually, by the age of 21, was running production and service for this company. There's now 40 or 50 people at that point. Just great opportunities because it was growing so fast. But it became pretty clear to me that engineering was not my thing. Mm-hmm. And sort of refocused my interest in medicine. So I was working full time, but going to community college at night, did 2 years community college and finished that up. And ultimately, although I quit my job, I ended up being a consultant for the next 2 years for the company. And while I went to UC Davis to finish my undergrad, and then applied to medical school and matched at UCSF, which I was super excited about. Didn't have any way to pay for it, so went placed call to the Navy, and they thought that was a great idea. So actually, the Navy paid for medical school, which worked out to be a great experience. And I really didn't know what I wanted to do in med school, but we had to do a mandatory rotation through all the surgical fields. I knew I wanted to do surgery by the time I hit about my 3rd year, but rotated through ENT with Roger Bowles was chair at the time. Roger Crumley was there in facial plastics. My senior resident was actually Rob Jackler, and you may or may not know Rob, but he ended up chair at Stanford at one later in his career. But Rob was my senior resident. He's sort of the one who told me I was a dummy not to do ENT, and he was right. Ended up matching up in Seattle with Charlie Cummings, who was chair at the time up there. And of course, Charlie, as a laryngologist and a head and neck surgeon, had a huge influence, as did Mike Glenn, who was one of the sort of early founders of bringing microvascular into head and neck back in the 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And that's really where I decided that head and neck was my field. It actually contemplated peds, but in the
Wow.
end, that's just the complexity and microvascular is new, is kind of an exciting part of the field, and was something I really was interested in. But finishing residency, it was time to go join the Navy. So I spent 3 years with the Navy down at Oakland, California, at Oak Knoll Medical Center, which was one of the 4 teaching hospitals at the time, which was great. I got to set up a research lab and set up a microvascular lab and did a lot of training in microvascular for the residents, and just really had a great experience there. I was supposed to be on the USS Mercy, the hospital ship, but it was tied up and docked the whole time I was there. So I was
Wow.
really in the hospital. But I knew I wanted to do academic medicine. So when my time was up in the Navy, I could have stayed, but we were shrinking pretty fast. In fact, the hospital I was in closed about 18
Mhm.
months later. They were really reducing the footprint within the military at that point. So opted to go out into academic medicine and went to Kansas for a job and thought I'd be there for 4 or 5 years. And that was 31 years ago.
Wow. Yeah, that's a little different than Kansas, a little different than Oregon and California for sure, so um, yeah, and thank you for your service. I realize you spent 15 years in the Navy.
Yeah.
That's quite amazing. And I think all the way from Atari to head and neck surgery is quite the story. Do you still have an Atari at home by chance?
I do not.
I think neither do I, but gotta find one. They're kind of hard to come across, and I'm not sure my kids would even really appreciate the
It'd probably be worth some
two-dimensional.
money if you did, though.
So, yeah, Frogger and a couple of those other ones I can't
Yeah,
remember.
Pong was the
Pac-Man.
original.
Yeah,
Pong was
yeah.
the original game, the very first home video system that I worked on.
Do you still game?
Not really.
Okay. Well, that's great, Doug. And I want to kind of build upon that a little bit. Surgery, especially a subspecialized field like head and neck surgery, is a demanding path. Were there any pivotal moments, mentors, or challenges in medical school or residency? And you had mentioned some of your colleagues earlier that really helped shape your journey. Where did you take that transition from? Hey, I'm an amazing head and neck surgeon. I've done a lot of great things. I want to shift my career into leadership. What were some things maybe that helped helped guide you through that or stimulated that interest?
Yeah, I think through residency training in Seattle, worked with a group of folks, obviously on the faculty side, and mentioned Charlie and Mike Glenn, but Ernie Wymuller and Al Hillel and Mark Richardson, who ended up at Hopkins and in Oregon. But my co-residents actually pretty much all ended up in academia as well. And that was just kind of the culture that we had in the department at that time, and trained with Tim McCullough, who's now at Wisconsin, and Paul Flint at Oregon, and Dave
Mm,
Isley at Hopkins, and Rance
mm,
Camato at Duke. I mean, these are all my co-residents. And so
mm,
we kind of, that was sort of our philosophy training together. And I think that was certainly start of it in terms of looking towards academic medicine. But I got a lot of administrative experience in the Navy, and found that I enjoyed it more than most. And really probably a realization that what bothered me most was, and it's probably somewhat true for surgeons, right? When something's broke, we typically want to fix it. That's kind of
mm,
our mentality, and
mm,
that was true administratively for me as well. So when I got to Kansas, I very quickly became vice chair, and then had the opportunity to do a lot of the administrative side of running the practice and building that up, and then ultimately doing that more broadly at the across the medical center as we built a practice plan, which we did not have when I first got there. And then um, really got a lot of experience through that, both financial and administrative, and just found that I really enjoyed that element of it. And obviously that spills into the education side of the house. And we grew our residency from 2 a year to 4 a year, and multiple new institutions. And it was an exciting time. There was a lot of growth happening, and it created a lot of opportunity. And I just found that I enjoyed it, and the more I did, sort of the more things come your way, the more opportunities come your way. And I think one of the challenges that people have is they tend to not want to step into leadership roles unless they're compensated for it. And I
Hmm.
sort of view most of those opportunities as an investment in my own education, right? I mean, a lot of the leadership jobs that I had early on did not pay anything, and obviously it costs money because you're not being clinical if you're doing that. But the experience that you get out of that, it's kind of like going back to school or getting your MBA or something else. It's just an investment in time. And I think that's how you have to think about those opportunities if you really have interest in growing in that area.
No, that's very helpful, and I think that's what you tend to see is a lot of the opportunities. It's more time, it's more investment, but you have to start by investing in yourself,
Right.
as you said. Um, I'm going to transition into a question about innovation and medical education from academic institutions, right? We see a lot of industry innovation. Academic centers were considered the hubs for this innovation. As chancellor, as a head and neck surgeon, where do you see the role, maybe KU or other universities in general, playing in helping drive medical innovation, cost and so forth, and we have so much talent and so much intellectual talent at our
Right.
institutions. How do we continue to be leaders and drive innovation? And some of the things that you described, especially with your interest in tech and so forth in the past and engineering, where do you see that as both a clinician, somebody who had kind of this engineering experience as well, and now as the leader of an institution? How do you help foster that? Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you go way back to, post World War II, there's sort of a pact made between the government came to the universities and said, we want you to be our R&D arm of the federal
Hmm.
government, as opposed to us standing up our own. And that was unique in the world, actually. And that partnership, really obviously matured and developed over the 70 years of creation of all the federal agencies, the funding mechanisms. But that partnership has always been a interesting one that's really being challenged a bit right now at this moment in time.
Hmm.
But it's a
Yes.
co-investment, right? I mean, the university is investing in faculty and people, facilities, support systems to allow the research to happen, and then the government's funding the actual research. And so it's a really unique partnership around the world. And I think it's what really drove the United States to have the strongest global economy and to be on the front edge of tech and innovation in all fields. That said, I think we in medicine are uniquely positioned because we're on the front lines and we see the challenges every day of healthcare and when you combine that with all that's evolving both on tech and then in AI and whether it's high tech sensing that allows you then to monitor your blood sugar on your phone or there
Hmm.
are just so many opportunities to take what's being developed and apply it into our fields to really advance it. And it has to be, in the end of the day, the people on the front lines that know the problems that need to be solved. And what we haven't always done as well as we could, I think, as institutions, as universities, is pushed hard to take what we've learned and commercialize it, right? And so to get it out the door and into a commercializable project. Because we tend to be focused on the research side of it and just driving the
Right.
research, but really it's the application of it that at the end of the day is going to change lives. And so, um, not unique to us, but we've all, I think, really focused on how do we facilitate that transition. In our case and others, we have an innovation park that has, all the business services a startup company needs, from helping to build a business
Mhm.
plan, going out
Amazing.
to raise money, and then if you need space, we have space. But we can really package everything around an entrepreneur, and help them lead into that startup company. And my experience with that in academia is not everybody's really excited about starting a company, but they are excited
Hmm.
about getting their product or their concept
Hmm.
commercialized. So you got to team it up, and not everybody wants to quit surgery to go sit and try to figure out how to do a startup, and
Yeah.
nor should they. So building the mechanisms around, as a surgeon to help them be able to commercialize something and have people doing sort of the day-to-day part of that while they continue both their practice but developing the next generation of ideas is, I think, really important. And that's kind of the next generation of, I think, university tech innovation, that we're going to see, that we are seeing, really.
Just to piggyback on that, what do you see the utility of advanced degrees in this process as well? We've seen a huge, shift in terms of not necessarily a shift, but growth in the number of MBAs.
Yep.
We've seen a lot of MD MBA programs. I myself have an MBA, and it's a great, you're investing in yourself, you're spending time, and for many surgeons, physicians, um, that comes at a price, right?
Absolutely.
What do you see? Now you're starting to see trends where people are like, well, maybe you don't need an MBA to do a lot of these things like you had just described. What do you say to folks that are interested in pursuing advanced degrees? Aside from investing in yourself and knowledge, it's always a great thing. But what's the ROI on something like that at this point? With the changes that we're seeing in innovation to AI and our digital, platforms and so forth. Where does the MBA have a role in this now?
I think it depends a lot on the individual and what you want to do, but also what your background and experience is. I mean, I think we undersell the things that we acquire through the course of our education. And of course, medical education is probably not the most efficient leadership development program out there, given the length of our
Mhm.
4 years of medical school and 3 to 6 years of surgical training or medical training. In my case, 6 years of surgical training. Before you really start on that leadership journey is not a typical way to think about leadership development. But I think in healthcare, if you don't have that, obviously the medical background, it's pretty hard for an MBA, for example, to walk into our world and know what to do.
Yeah.
So I think we are unique in that way, and obviously it's a highly competitive field. I think ENT is unique because we are in the clinic, we're in the operating room, we're in the outpatient surgical setting, or in the emergency room. I mean, we have visibility to health systems much broader than a lot of fields do.
Mm.
And I think that gives us a unique perspective on our environment and where some of the challenge points are within that as well. And then, through our medical education, and then if you're in academia, at least you're working with students and residents as well, really developing that skill of mentorship and counseling and education. Really, I think develops our own skills, but also creates a ton of great mentors within our field. And so
Mhm.
I think there's some things that, depending on what you want to do in leadership, there's some skills that are pretty critical, and finance is probably one of the most important ones. If you
Mhm.
really ever want to be taken seriously around a leadership table, you got to understand finance. And to your point of where does an MBA come in, that's probably where an MBA comes in.
Yeah.
And it's not the only way to get that. I don't have an MBA. I got it sort of through the School of Hard Knocks, if you will. But
Mhm.
you
Yeah.
can get there. But I do think it probably does lend you some credibility around the table of at least knowing that you have some relative understanding of how finance works in any environment. Healthcare is pretty unique finance for that. But obviously, people management, legal, communications, strategic planning, all things are really important as you develop leadership, or if you're developing a company, either one. Those are great skills to have, and you can speak to it better than I how much of that you really got out of your MBA. But some MBAs are very generic, and some are very focused on healthcare, so they're not all the same.
Right. And I think that's an important differentiator as well. I think that you have the qualitative parts of an MBA and you have the quantitative parts of an MBA. You have MBAs that are healthcare focused and some, majority are not. And I think as physicians, it's also my personal opinion is that having an MBA, a traditional MBA, gives you the view through the lens of what the rest of the business world is looking at. And I think that's very beneficial. And I think to your point is you have a lot of experience through healthcare already. And I think adding that and understanding the rest of the business sector through a traditional MBA was very helpful personally. But
I would think so, and I mean, I interact probably more with non-medical than medical at this point in time,
mhm,
whether it's through the economics of
mhm,
collegiate athletics and
yeah,
the Big 12 conference and the
yeah,
NCAA, or really through our startup companies, most of which are not medical or medically related,
mhm,
or really through my donor base, which is obviously very successful business
mhm,
people. Uh,
mhm,
so I think the broader view is really healthy to have going in. But so I
right,
don't think you have to have it, but I think it is both probably personally a value add, but probably optically as well.
right. Well, thanks, Doug. That was quite informative, and we're going to transition from kind of these advancements in medicine and innovation to your personal transition into leadership. Um, Shifting from medicine to academic leadership it's a big transition. And we kind of talked about this earlier, but what motivates you in these leadership roles, and from the time when you started as head and neck surgeon to now as chancellor. what kept you going to each level, right? You took steps within your department, then within the medical school, then within the larger institution, and then to the level of chancellor. At each one of those steps, what kept you? What was the driving force for each one of those?
Yeah, like I said at the beginning, I figured we'd be in Kansas for 4 or 5 years, and 31 years later, we're still there.
Yeah.
And that's largely because opportunities did present themselves along the way.
Mhm.
And so, I ended up being chair, I think, for about 13 years altogether between interim and active. Um, but at the same time, got very active in the development of our practice plan, and was chair of the finance committee for 8 years. And really, that's where I learned finance for real. Was
Yeah,
was
sure.
living that and seeing that enterprise quadruple in size over a period of 6 or 7 years. But also became the dean for clinical affairs while I was still chair. That really gave me exposure to obviously the relationship between the university and the health system, but also GME, CME, alumni relations, all that kind of rolled up under me, and so
Mhm.
got a much broader experience of the educational side of the house, and then ultimately undergraduate medical education as well. So um, really was able to grow that portfolio and still enjoyed it. And obviously, as you know, there's been a ton of innovation through all those things through medical education, and to be part of that. And then my boss at the time retired and created an opportunity to become the executive vice chancellor, which was really to lead the university side of our medical center, which was medicine, nursing, health professions, the research engine, but really also facilities, police department. I mean, all the things that go with
Mhm.
that. Um, and stepped into that, and that was about the time we were raising money and did raise money for a new education building, and with the dean that I hired at the time, Rob Samari, really we didn't want to build a building for yesterday's education. We wanted to build it for tomorrow's, and so we really completely redesigned the curriculum of the School of Medicine to go into a new two facility, which was really 50% simulation, and really pushed that forward with that, which is a great experience. And I never contemplated being a chancellor. It just,
Mhm.
when my boss who hired me said she was going to retire, I kind of looked around the landscape and I thought, well, can go offense or defense. So
Yeah.
I decided
Uh,
to throw my hat in the ring. But it was
yeah.
really because you don't when you've been around these things for a while and you've looked at a number of jobs, which we all do over the course of time, and there's sort of what they tell you the job is, and then there's what the job really is, right, at the end of the
Yeah.
day. And
Yeah.
I thought I knew what the job was, in large part, having sat on the cabinet for 4 years and saw a lot of the challenges. And I knew there were great opportunities, and there are great opportunities for collaboration between the medical center and the university, which we were not tapping into. But there's some things I really hadn't anticipated either. So.
Yeah, sure. Well, I remember your talk from SUO, so it was really remarkable to hear about some of those stories as well. So, Doug, let me ask you another question. What parallels do you see, if any, between being a surgeon and university leader?
Um, well, I think it's probably our approach to challenges, right? I think there is a surgical approach to challenges, and one of my colleagues when asked about my leadership style, said, "Well, he's a surgeon.
Mm,
He like looks at the problem, he analyzes all the data, makes a decision, and cuts, and never looks back." But
yeah.
that's partially true, right? I think on the
Yeah.
front end, that's probably not entirely inaccurate. We really try and gather as much information as we can and then make decisions. But I think we also, as surgeons, are reasonably comfortable knowing we're never going to have all the information, right? You got to
Hmm.
do the best you can with the information you have, and you got to be able to make decisions. If you're always waiting for more information, you're just never going to make a decision. So I think our training does develop that. I think where that sort of analogy falls short is the never looks back part. Because I think we're
Hmm.
always looking back, right? We
Hmm.
first of all, going in, we have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C
Hmm.
typically, because stuff often doesn't go the way you think it's gonna go. But additionally, we're always, reviewing, or, when things go well or they go poorly, why is that? And how can we do it differently in the future? And that's how we really advance the field. So I do think that is probably how at least for me, I tend to approach the leadership role of really facing the challenges, which is let's grab as much information as we can. Let's collectively make the best decision we can. Let's go. But at the same time, we know we have to learn and modify and flex along the way because it often is not going to turn out the way you think it is. And I think we're pretty comfortable in that setting. I think that's valuable.
And that's great. And I'm sure you, as a surgeon, there were probably things that you had to change to fit the role of your leadership role. And I think that, like you described it, I think it sounds like it's an evolution over time and experience in dealing with different situations. And but to your point, I think being a surgeon and coming up with plans and having contingencies is certainly very beneficial in the type of day-to-day activities that you deal with.
I think one of the biggest challenges for me in this shift over was the mentality of the institution. The mentality on a medical center campus is one of constant evolution and innovation, and
Mhm.
there's always new drugs, new technologies. I feel like they upgrade the electronic medical record every other week.
Yeah,
It's just, it is constant, the Medicare rules, the
yeah.
compliance, I mean, it's changing all the time, right? And
Mhm.
we just sort of begrudgingly, but we take it in stride, right?
Mhm.
When you get into a more traditional academic campus, life doesn't work that way.
Mhm.
And it's a very different mentality, and change is actually much, much harder. That was probably one of the harder transitions for me, is to try and figure out how to take an organization that is not receptive to change typically and
Yeah.
really start to move it forward into a more modern era.
Change and culture of change is a widely written about topic and discussed topic, but what would you just say, maybe one or two things to bring change to, systems where maybe there's just years of, this is how it's been done, you know, you're the new person on the block, don't rock the boat, but, bring people onto your team and see your vision through. How do you, obviously you're going to have some folks that are going to believe in what your plan is, and then you'll have some that may not. Where do you, any ideas, any tips
Well, I
for
mean,
that?
you're right. It's widely written about and studied, probably because it's so hard.
Yeah.
As they say, your culture eats your strategy for breakfast, and
Mhm.
that's really
Mhm.
true. So it's how do you look at your culture at the end of the day? And it's taken a lot longer for me in this role than it has in any other role, but it's for all the reasons you just described. And you got to have the right leadership team, you got to have the right vision, you got to have massive transparency. I mean, you just really have to get the data out there to explain why you're doing what you're doing and where you're headed. And then, you got to deliver. You can't overpromise, but you got to
Mhm.
deliver. And people need to believe in your motives and believe that you're doing things for the reason that you're doing them. And that's doesn't happen overnight. That takes time. It takes building trust. But it also takes, to your point, you're going to have your early adopters who understand it pretty empirically, or they're going to jump on board pretty quick, and they can then expand, and then you kind of grow it out from there. But it takes a significant amount of time, and I'm in a process right now of reorganizing our university leadership team, where we've been around for 165 years. The medical center's been around for 100 years, and they are completely separate organizations. I mean, from
Mhm.
a leadership, all the one's on Oracle and one's on Workday. That's how different they are.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I'm in the process of combining the leadership across the two to have one leadership team for both. That hasn't happened in 165 years. So it just takes enough time to build the right team in place and gain the momentum to really help people see the next wave of possibility. I would have loved to have done that 5 years ago. We had a little
Yeah.
something called the pandemic kind of got in the way, but
Yeah.
it's just you can't move. I think the bigger the organization, sort of the slower you have to go to get all the pieces in place. And if you try to go fast, you will lose people very quickly, and then you build a lot of resistance within.
Mhm. Okay. Well,
So,
thanks, Doug, for that. I think that everybody, when things are going great, the engine's moving, everything's great, and I think that as your role, and I can't imagine at the level of a chancellor, but when there's challenging times, I think that's when it's it's great and everything's moving along, everybody's happy and things are smooth. But I think leadership roles, the real challenges are how you manage yourself during difficult times. And, certainly for a chancellor, I can't imagine, I mean, at a very micro level, starting from an ENT department and then moving up to a very large scale endeavor. And I think it's the challenge for leaders is how to keep people, focused and see a bigger vision sometimes, even when there's really rough times. And I think,
Well, and I would have loved to seen anywhere in my career those days where it's all going great and rolling along. I don't
yeah,
know that
yeah.
that actually, I don't know that actually exists. Um,
Yeah, that's
and
true.
you're either moving forward or you're moving backwards. And so I think if you have to constantly be looking around the corner at the next opportunity or the next change that's coming, or you just have to constantly keep your head up and be doing that no matter what level you are, because that's where the next opportunity presents itself. And that's also the fun part of the job at the end of the day is it's like, how do we get better? We can always get better. I've never seen anything that couldn't get better. So thinking about how you do that and just building that into your culture of continually looking for ways to get better is an important part of how you move an organization forward.
That's an important piece of advice. Thanks, Doug. A couple more things that we're going to touch base on today. Um, for aspiring medical students, residents, faculty members, what advice would you give to those hoping to be Dr. Gerard one day in their life, whether in medicine or leadership?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think it is understanding some of the skill sets you need, and we talked about that a little bit already. I think there's lots of ways to get that, whether it's through an MBA, whether it's through, which I would argue MBA is not enough. That's a good starting
Mhm.
point, but it's
Mhm.
you got to put it into practice. You got to learn how to practice what you learn at the end of the day. You
Mhm.
can do that a lot through mentorship and learning from others, from reading, from, courses that aren't as big as the MBA. There's lots of ways to get there. But you have to just jump in and start practicing these things. I mean, you can read about them until you're blue in the face, but until you've really struggled, and some of the biggest things are people. It's all about people management and relationships at the end of the day, and you are successful through your relationships. And so there is a pretty profound emotional intelligence component to being successful in these roles. And in fact, we back in the early 2000s, we decided to see if we could teach emotional intelligence in our residency program. We built a whole program, right? It kind of became a running joke, but actually, we were trying to correlate whether we could improve it. And when we looked at our inpatient satisfaction, that was kind of the best thing we could come up with. It actually correlated pretty strongly with the work that we did. I do think you can learn how to be more effective in an emotionally intelligent fashion through communication skills and learning how to communicate differently with different types of people. People hear things differently, and understanding that's important in terms of knowing how people need to hear something to grasp it. And those are just skills that you really only get by starting to practice. So jumping in, some of those volunteer jobs we talked about that,
Mhm.
hey, we need somebody to do a committee to
Mhm.
develop this, or we need somebody to work on this project. I mean, that's how you get that experience and the practice of it. And I think it plays out in all aspects of your life as you go forward at home and at work. But I think the really important skills to have, even if you really don't want to be a leader at the end of the day, I think the really important skills to have, but you're not going to get them if you don't put yourself out there. And we underestimate how good we are, how good our skills are at a lot of these things through our medical education. We think, wow, I don't have an MBA, therefore I can't do that. It's like, no, actually, you probably got better
Yeah.
skills than a lot of MBAs have because they've never done it either.
Right. Right. Okay. Well, one question related to your own personal career. If you could look back to this point in your career, what is one maybe single achievement that you are the most proud of?
Oh, wow. That's a toughie. Um,
Yeah. It's
yeah.
I don't want to put you on the spot for that one, Doug, but
We'll go professionally. How's that?
yeah,
Because clearly my
professionally, yeah,
kids are
we're
my single biggest accomplishment. No question about that. I think it's really been bridge building all along the way, and whether that was at the department level, it was building bridges with multiple additional institutions, whether it was at the medical center level, ultimately leading a merger between our practice plan and our hospital to become a health system, which really allowed it to then just quadruple in size over time, but we just needed to build that bridge and get that alignment to build that alignment. And now at the university level and doing that with the medical center and the Alumni Association and the Endowment Association and the Athletics Association, to really all be one team is just sort of the next level of that level, those kinds of bridges that we've needed to create alignment. You can do powerful things when you're aligned. It's really hard to move the needle if you aren't aligned in what you're trying to accomplish. And so I think that's maybe the one thing I've probably been most successful at so far.
I really appreciate that. As a head and neck surgeon, I got to ask you, do you miss doing free flaps?
I do. I actually
Yeah.
do. I do. I think I don't know that there's more challenging part of medicine, let alone otolaryngology in head and neck, and then the reconstructive part of head and neck, which I was a huge push forward for our field. I trained in the days mostly of PEC flaps and other SCM flaps and all sorts of local regional flaps, but really it was such a huge push forward to be able to bring microvascular into it. And then you guys have only gotten way better than sort of that first generation of free flap guys. It took us forever to get stuff done. You guys knock it out in 6 hours. So you're far better at it than we were, but it was such a big advancement to the field that I do really miss that. And actually, I just stopped clinic about 4 months ago.
Amazing.
Followed
Wow.
my cancer patients for a long time, and it wasn't in the OR, but it was following them when they needed something. I get them where they needed to go, and just enjoyed at least continuing to those relationships.
Yeah, and I think that's another transition that when you talk about, going to leadership roles is how do you transition away from one passion, not completely. And I think that in many roles very similar to yours, I feel, individuals try to keep some connection to their clinic or to their survivorship programs or something of that nature. So I think that's very commendable,
And
so.
it first of all, it was my slice of normal for the week, so that was good.
Yeah.
But it also helped me keep my finger on the pulse of the health system and what was happening. And you could see it on the ground. You could hear it from the patients. You could hear it from my colleagues in the clinic. So that when I'm sitting in the boardroom for the health system and,
You can
it
connect.
helped me
Yeah.
have that perception of maybe what you're hearing on one side is not always the case. So I found that very valuable as well.
That's a great point, Doug. A couple more things, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Sure.
We certainly appreciate your time, and we all know how busy you are. On a lighter note, when you're not leading a university and having all the many responsibilities you do, how do you like to unwind?
That's evolved pretty significantly over time as well with time constraints. I mean, I'm an avid snow skier. I like to play tennis. I actually raced cars for over 20 years, and a habit I had to give up as I went into
Wow.
this. Still ride motorcycles. That's kind of one way I still get out to unwind a little bit. But I've taken up fly fishing probably about
Okay.
10 years ago, maybe, and actually with a group of head and neck surgeons for the most part that we
Okay.
get together at least once a year and do that. But I've got some other folks I fish with as well, and that is probably the most relaxing thing. And you say it's relaxing, it's really distracting, right? It's you got to completely focus your mind on something different. Sort of like about racing cars as well. Your mind better not be wandering when you're at 150 miles an hour. So
Yeah.
it keeps you very focused on something besides medicine.
What kind of car are you racing?
I race Porsches and BMWs. Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. So you have a track there, I'm assuming somewhere in Kansas.
We
Next
do, but we
track.
travel all over the Midwest. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Didn't say I was good at it. I just said I like it.
The need for speed, as they say, right? So, and final question for you, Doug. If you had one book that you could recommend to our viewers today, that just to pick up, we all see the self-help books in the airport and everybody wants to pick one up that change your life in a month, et cetera, et cetera. What do you have that you would recommend somebody to, either take a listen through or listen to or to read in
Yeah,
relation to the leadership?
I think probably one of the ones that I read early on, which I found really helpful was some of Jim Collins' work.
Mhm.
Good to Great being sort of his foundational one that he's probably best known for. But it really does talk about how you build a functional team and create alignment, and in a lot of cases of how that works, and then sort of taking it to the next level with his subsequent there might have been some in between, but another book of his called Built to Last, which really talks about how do you build organizations for the long haul that are not dependent on the individual. And that's, and then a lot of cases there you can look at, whether it's Lehigh, Coca, Chrysler, or others,
Mhm.
where you can build a great organization, but if it's dependent on one person, it's not going to last.
Mhm.
And so you really have to, it talks about how do you build organizations that tolerate and even thrive through transition. And I think that's another really important part of as you think about leading at the small scale or the largest scale. You want it to continue on a good path once you're gone. We're just stewards of these things, right? We're
Mhm.
we're there for a brief period of time. So you want to see it go forward, not backwards when you walk out the door.
Mhm. No, that's great, and I'll be sure to recommend that as well. But that's that's really been a really good conversation today, Doug, and I want to thank you again for your insightful conversation here. Your journey from medicine to leadership is truly inspiring. And again, I really truly value you sharing your stories with us and our viewers. Um, and to our listeners, thank you for joining us on Cafe Suo. It's What's in Your Cup. Stay tuned for the next conversation with leaders like Dr. Doug Gerard. And we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Riz.